Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. I have the pleasure of coming to you every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM or streamed online at www.saga960am.ca. We've had some interesting interviews with some fascinating people and people with businesses and challenges and mental health issues and lots of different problems. But one of the things that numerous different people have commented to me about is autism and the rise of autism of late, and for a bunch of different reasons. And a couple of different people have reached out to me saying that it is even more challenging with an autistic child if you're single, and it's even more challenging during COVID-19. And a friend of mine reached out to me, said, you don't realize how challenging it is as a single mom with an autistic child during COVID-19, and we need to talk about it. So I thought that would be an interesting discussion. So I want to introduce you to Vanessa Shelley. She's a real estate agent in the Durham region, though she covers the whole GTA. And she's a single mom, and she's got an autistic child. Vanessa, how are you? Welcome to our show.
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me on, Brian.
My pleasure. So you wanted to talk to me about the challenges. Tell me about the challenges.
Yeah, so COVID-19, first of all, for any parent, my heart goes out to them because it's definitely a challenge in itself, with the social aspect for children that they want to socialize with their friends and not being able to do all of that. The component of autism that comes along is that our children with autism, depending on, especially on the scale, they need structure. And so COVID-19 has kind of thrown a monkey wrench into all of that structure. Like my son was off from school basically from, March break until midsummer sort of before he was able to go back to his special, even autism school. And the lack of routine and structure for him was extremely difficult. It caused him to go into self-injuring. He was doing a lot of head banging. We had to up medication for him to help prevent those type of things. So it really presented a lot of unique challenges just above and beyond the challenges we have with kids during this time anyway. So it was definitely an interesting time for sure.
Interesting. That's that's in quotes, I presume.
Yes, interesting in quotes.
So let's take a step back. What is autism?
So autism is a developmental disorder. It's with my son, especially, he was progressing normally up until about 15 months. And all of a sudden we started to notice things like his eye contact was not there anymore. He would look everywhere other than your eyes. He would look at the ceiling, the floor, his hands, especially his hands. He was very hyper-focused on those. And we had friends who had an autistic child as well. So I'd sort of known about some of the signs at the time. We took him to a developmental pediatrician who specializes in all types of developmental delays. And she did about a 2.5-hour testing session with him and delivered the news to us that he did in fact have moderate to severe autism. As many people know, autism is a sliding scale. There is low functioning autism, which my son has, and then there's high functioning or Asperger's, as many people know it as, autism. And the difference really can be where they fall in the spectrum as far as how progressed they are. So my son is nonverbal. Now he does have a few words. He can say his name. He started to learn to count. And he's started to learn a few words, but for the most part, even though he's almost 10 years old, his mind is that of about a 3.5-year-old. But wording wise, he's probably at sort of a year level. So it's really an overall delay in their developmental growth.
And what's, your expectation? What's the prognosis for him in the future? Will this be just delay, but he'll get there? Or is he, going to be challenged his whole life?
So that is always the interesting question. The answer to that is we really don't know. We have been told by the doctors to expect to have him live with us or need care for his whole life. Many on the autistic spectrum can in fact live on their own. Right now, as it stands, we're being told that probably will not be the case. And one of the major issues too is the lack of sense of danger, that they don't have that sense of danger. My son will, even though we've explained a million times about traffic safety and road safety and all of those things, if he sees a pine cone, which he's very obsessed with pine cones right now, across the street, he will fully just run across the street with no regard. and things like water safety. And a lot of this is where it becomes scary for parents with children with autism, is because they get so hyper focused on something that they're interested in. They forget about, they wander, which my son has done before. They don't have a sense of danger. There's a lot of times there's issues with water safety and drowning because they will go chasing something into the water. So it definitely presents its own unique set of challenges for sure.
We're chatting tonight with Vanessa Shelley about the challenges of being a parent with a child with autism. And Vanessa has the double challenge or triple challenge that not only a parent with a child with autism, but she's a single mom, and it's obviously COVID-19. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Vanessa in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Vanessa Shelley. She's a real estate agent in the Durham region, east of Toronto, though she covers, I understand, the whole GTA. And at some point in time, we may talk real estate with Vanessa. But tonight we're talking about her challenges. She's got an autistic child. She's a single mom. And clearly COVID-19 has made that even more challenging. Vanessa, wow, what a challenge. What a struggle. Like, how do you deal with it all?
Is this a good question? It took me a long time to figure out how to do that. It definitely was very difficult in the beginning years of life for him. My son at 3 years old became severely violent. I used to have black eyes from him, bite marks, scratch marks. He broke my nose because when they have autism and they're trying to explain something to him, because he's nonverbal, he would get very frustrated. So he would want something and I couldn't figure out what he wanted. And at the time, we had tried things like sign language with him and, different things, but his understanding wasn't there either. So one of the issues too with language is there is something called receptive language, which is what you understand. And then there's your verbal language, which is what you put out. And his receptive language was very delayed as well. So it wasn't that he was even understanding half of the time what we were saying, which became very frustrating for him. And his outlet for that was extreme violence. So that was very, very difficult to go through.
How'd you deal with that? My gosh.
Yeah, it's when you are forced into the situation, you're forced to sink or swim, basically. And
what'd you do?
It was just one of those things I had to dig deep. And yeah, I definitely had a lot of bad moments where I didn't think that I could pull through and cope with it, but I'm sitting here today. So I obviously made it through. And it in the later years, once the violence was done, that lasted till he was about 5 years old too. So it was about 2 years of issues with that. It was very, very, very stressful. Especially for my husband.
And did you grow him out of it, or did he just lose it?
So we ended up having some behavioral intervention come in. And I have to say, to give a round of applause to Durham region, especially because the services that they have are amazing. And to be perfectly honest, I was lost when I first got the diagnosis. We were very fortunate. There was a service at the time. I'm not sure that they're still here now. I think they've changed into something else, but it was called Resources for Exceptional Children. And we were actually assigned a worker who sort of helped us to navigate, because there are so many different things that you have to deal with as far as, what therapies are going to work for him and what works, what doesn't work. And so they directed us to Grandview Children's Center, which was able to kind of help us find therapists that could deal with the behaviors and, teach us some strategies that when he was getting into that situation, how to help him pull out of it with redirection and some different strategies. So that definitely helped us. So I'm very thankful, because I think without them, we would have really been in a lot of trouble.
Give me a sense. What is a redirection strategy? What can work when someone is being violent?
So a lot of times violence will come from, again, being hyper-focused. And it can be something as silly as he sees a piece of paper on the floor and he wants to pick it up, or a dirty cigarette butt. Sometimes it's things like that they really want to touch. Now, obviously for health and safety reasons, you can't let him touch it. But when he has it in his mind that is all he wants to touch, you have to start to find other ways to break that hyper-focus. And so it used to be things like, we would have our little bag of tricks, I would call it. And it would be very preferred things that he liked. Maybe some gummy bears or maybe an iPad with a show on it. And you would try to bring those and introduce those things to try to break that focus to hopefully redirect him out of the cycle that he was going in. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And sometimes we just had to utilize safe strategies so that he wouldn't injure himself or others.
What are safe strategies?
So it was basically things like, we'd have him sit on our lap and we would put our arms around him and hold him and just, basically rub and stroke. They're very sensory orientated. So sometimes these violent things could come from lighting. Lighting was actually a huge one that we didn't know for the longest time. We would take him, at the time, we would take him to church. We would take him into his preschool, and most of those places have fluorescent lighting. Fluorescent lighting to a lot of autistic children looks like somebody's going like this in front of your face. Now you can imagine trying to focus or do anything with that constantly can get very frustrating. And so we discovered this when he went to junior kindergarten, actually, that it was the lights that would bother him, because as soon as he would walk into the school, he would do this every single time. And so his school at the time was actually very gracious and offered to change all of the lighting in his classroom to LED lighting instead, which was amazing. And he changed completely. It literally changed his behavior almost overnight. We noticed a massive difference. And by the time he was done JK, it was like a different boy. The violence was gone and he was doing very, very well.
That's fascinating. So this ultra focus for some reason allows him to discern the fluorescent light flickering that the vast majority of us don't see.
Yes. And it's funny, they've actually in the States come out with a trailer. It actually travels around. I mean, it obviously not during COVID now, but they've created something called the Autism Experience Trailer. And what it's supposed to do is when you go in it, it's supposed to submerge you in an environment of how an autistic person would feel. Because the levels of noise that they hear aren't always the levels we hear. We're able to tune things out sometimes. But for something like I've noticed with my son, if there's a lot of, especially when it's very busy, this used to be a big issue. Now he's able to deal with this quite well. But when we would take him to a crowded place where we can filter out the noise and put it in the background and focus on what you're talking to, say, he would hear every voice and everything, and it would become overwhelming to him. And so it's those kind of challenges, but that's why this autism experience van drives around and tries to help people understand what it's like to be autistic.
Now, apologies, I don't know much about autism. Where does it come from? Is it genetic? Is it environmental? What's the source of it?
So the answer again to that is they're not sure. We actually participated in a big study with Sick Kids Hospital. His father and I, we donated blood so that they could try to see if there was a gene isolation. They did not find one with us. So they did say with our son, it is environmental. They aren't quite sure. The way that his developmental pediatrician explained it to me is autism is not just one single thing that contributes to it. It's like a series of light switches. And certain things, certain chemicals in the air, certain things that we ingest, there's all of these different factors. It's like flipping off a series of switches. And when you get a certain sequence, then you get autism. And unfortunately, especially in the Durham region, there seems to be a very high number of cases of autism. I can't speak to what the reason would be for that, but I do know it is higher than a lot of places in Ontario.
Now, you've said we numerous times, but you
Yes.
say you're a single mom. So obviously you had a marriage that broke up?
Yes. Yeah.
And was the autism part of the problem or what happened?
It definitely was a factor for sure. It was very difficult for both his dad and I to cope with. We both, went into therapy to try to deal with it and in our own ways. And, we sort of came to the conclusion that because, my son is very high needs and it is very tiring to be with him, and even though we take turns and everything else, it was wearing us down almost. And, now that we're separated, we're able to take those breaks of, I have him for 5 days and then his dad has him. So it gives us a chance to recharge and honestly makes us better parents because we're able to, feel fresh and revive when we were able to see him and actually focus on him rather than just being constantly worn down. So unfortunately, in our case, it did help the greater good to be separated.
Yeah, I can't
even
imagine
though it's obviously
the
very
challenge
tough
to a
be a single
marriage on a relationship with such with such challenges in the house.
Yeah, unfortunately, the statistics, I mean, I've heard people argue against them, but the statistics typically are a mother and father with an autistic child, there's an 80% chance that they will split at some point, just because it is definitely a challenging thing. And it wasn't something we ever wanted to happen, but unfortunately, yeah.
But you share responsibility.
We do. Yep. And he's an excellent father. He, it takes a while to learn, how to do it on your own without having somebody there helping right at that time. It's definitely been a learning curve for both of us, but yeah, we've definitely have adapted to it quite well.
And how do you run your real estate business?
I don't sleep much is the answer to that question. Yeah, I mean, I am one of those people who likes to keep busy because I mean, especially during COVID too, I find that when you're sitting there and you have too much to think about, life can be pretty depressing at times. So I like to keep busy. So I'm always doing something. I'm always keeping myself busy. And, fortunately with the schedule that I have, with his dad, he's able to take him for 5 days. So that gives me a lot of time to devote to clients. And then he does go to public school 2.5 days a week, and he goes to his autism school 2 days a week. So it really does kind of help give us that little bit of time as well during the day.
And what happens if with COVID-19 the schools close down?
So when public schools close down, then we obviously have him. His autism school actually falls under the daycare type parameters. And so as long as they stay open, he can attend there. Now, at the beginning of COVID, when everything was shut down, he was home. And that was probably the beginning of the end, to be perfectly honest, for my marriage, because we were home with him constantly. So that was definitely an added pressure. And it was very difficult on my son too, because all he wanted to do was go. He loves both of it. He loves both his school and his autism school, and, all of the structure that provides. So it was really hard on him too.
The school, the autism school, that's with other autistic kids, I presume?
It is. So it's an ABA school, which stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis. It's a treatment, and a lot of parents with autism, there used to be a very negative connotation around applied behavioral analysis because they would utilize sometimes techniques that were seen as cruel. Now it has come a long way. And it is one thing, even within the autism community, there's a lot of dissension, which a lot of people don't know. I mean, there are some autism parents that hate other autism parents because they feel that their child, it can get very crazy. And I think honestly, it's because we're all exhausted and we're all frustrated, and it's just one of those things. But his school has been fantastic for him. It's taught him a lot of play skills and learning skills and self-help skills. I mean, my son, up until 2.5 years ago, was still in diapers. So you can imagine a child that's up to here on me in diapers. It was, basically like having a small teenager. Fortunately, the strategies that they were able to put into place and help us at home, we were able to get him potty trained, which was honestly the best day of my life when that happened, because honestly, we were told, there's a real possibility that he could be in diapers into adulthood. And I had fully devoted that was going to be the case. So I was very happy that didn't. And he surprises us every day with, the different things that he's able to do and that he's learning. So it's great to see.
I don't understand. What's the criticism of these ABA schools?
So it's because it used to be the techniques that used to be used, I guess, they were seen as cruel. It was very repetitive and very, the children with autism do a lot of this, the hand flapping and the jumping. My son is the jumper. And they used to discourage that or make them, sit on their hands and things like that to try to teach them to be normal. Well, we've learned that with autism, what is normal? And so with my son, his jumping, or they call it stimming, and what that does for him is it's able to quiet down all of the noise around him so that he can focus. So for him, if they were trying to teach him something, he needs to jump because he needs to get all of that extra stimulation out so that he can focus on what it is. I think just years ago that they didn't understand that, and some of the techniques were considered controversial. It's changed. It's come a long way, but for parents who don't know that, they hear ABA and it can be quite a hot topic. I remember posting once on Facebook very innocently about how much my son loved his ABA school. And honestly, I had to take the post down because the autism community, some of them were very for it and some really went off on a very cruel and negative way, which was, shocking and also disheartening to see from, a community who's supposed to be supportive of each other.
Right. Now with ADHD, there's drugs one can take. Are there drugs one takes for autism?
So there can be. The biggest one that they tend to take is, especially when they're kind of hitting puberty, that's always the tricky area, because their aggression centers of their brains are not regulated the same as in an atypical child. And so my son is on an antipsychotic medication called Risperidone. And what it does is it basically helps him to control the not only the anger part of his brain, but also that impulsive nature that he has. So it took a little while to figure out a dose with his doctor, but it seems to help. And for the most part, he's a very happy child who's loving. I mean, he definitely has his moments still where we have to watch and we have to, look at that medication every once in a while as he grows and see if we need to up the dose. But it's been a lifesaver for us for sure.
But Ritalin and some people have even talked about cannabis and things like that for ADHD. None of those work for autism.
Yeah, so we actually did try. We tried an off-brand called Vyvanse for my son. It was supposed to be an ADHD medication. It didn't really do much for him positive, but what we did notice was it would interrupted his sleep quite a bit. And our saving grace has always been that he's been a solid 12-hour sleeper. He needed that because I've always said he does jumps all day long. I mean, he's going to be in the Olympics one day if he can ever get into it because he just jumps so much. He has so much energy. And so he needed that sleep. So to introduce a drug that was disrupting his sleep and, he'd be awake at 3 and 4 in the morning and raring to go was not worth it. And we weren't seeing the positive changes enough to continue that medication. We actually did do an experiment with a doctor, a CBD doctor. And we did try him on some CBD oil for a while. Again, we didn't notice enough of an improvement. And it was very hard. The delivery system is very hard for them. They're very picky eaters a lot of times. And so sensory things, trying to hide things in food, he definitely could tell when something was in there. So the delivery method was very difficult just to get into him. So for that reason, we decided to go down a different road. And the medication was definitely the last resort for us, but it was needed because he was hitting his head off of things. He'd bang his head off his knee, bang his head off the wall. And so we couldn't have that. So we had to turn to the medication.
Now, Vanessa, tonight you present very well on Facebook and social media. You're always, well put together and you present extremely well. Obviously, as a successful real estate agent, you have to.
Yes.
A lot of people probably wouldn't believe the story that you've just told me for the last couple of minutes about how challenging it is. Do your friends understand what you're going through?
A lot of times they don't. And to be perfectly honest, I have always been the type of person who has believed that as soon as you give up on yourself, you give up on everything. And so for myself, it was always, no matter how horrible I was feeling, no matter how down and literally that I wanted to die some days, I would get up and I would do the day that I needed to do and do it the way that I need to do. And I never wanted to let my son see me broken. And so I needed to stay strong for him and to be there and to be the face that he needed to be out in the public and representing him and going out and fighting for him, because really to get the services and things, it sometimes is a fight. And so I definitely have done that for his whole life for him. And yeah, some days it kills me, but I try to stay strong for him. He's my reason I stay strong.
We're chatting tonight with Vanessa Shelley about the challenges of being a parent with a child with autism. We're going to take a break and come back more with Vanessa in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Vanessa Shelley, a real estate agent in the Durham region, about the challenges of being a parent with a child with autism. Vanessa, maybe we can roll back for a second. What are the first signs, just in case other people have got kids or are worried about kids? What are the first signs of a child with autism, please?
Yeah, so for us, it was the biggest signs that we noticed was, he was developing fairly normally. He was hitting his milestones. He was a little delayed in walking, but, a lot of children are. I think he was 13 months when he started walking, but he was hitting them pretty consistently and, saying mom and dad and duck and ball. And he had quite a few words. And it was pretty suddenly that we started to notice that he was losing those words. He would start to sort of make up a gibberish language, I called it, because it didn't really make any sense. And I would start to test him and I would say, well, what is this, baby? And he would start to mumble something else and it wasn't ball anymore. And I thought that was very peculiar, but I didn't really think anything of it because I know with children, they can take, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So I wasn't too concerned about it at the time. The other thing that I started to notice is when I would take him into a store, he would look up at the lights and solely at the lights. He didn't want to look at anything else. I'd be showing him toys and blankets and stuffies, and all he wanted to do was focus on the lights. In fact, his favorite thing was when I would take him to Home Depot into the lighting section, and it was like Christmas. He just thought that was the greatest thing ever. So I started to notice, those were the first 2 things. And then I started to notice the hand flapping. He would do this a lot, and he would look at his fingers and then he would flap. And also walking on his tippy toes. When he started walking, he would walk only on his toes. It was a combination of all of these things that started to tip me off that something might be amiss. And as I said, I did have a friend who had an older daughter who had autism. And I remember being over there one day with my son and just sort of hinting to her that I thought he might be showing some signs. And it's a very difficult thing because I've been in this situation now. So I understand what I put her in. I've had other parents say to me, well, my child's doing this or my child's doing that. Do you think they have autism? And honestly, even as a mother with an autistic child, I can't answer that question. A child may show 1 or 2 signs or maybe all of them and not have autism. So it's very hard to say, but those are sort of the first warning signs that you might need to have something checked into.
And you said that it's environmentally caused. Did you change where you were living, or did anything happen that may possibly be the cause of it?
No. So we lived in the same area, from birth until he was about 3 years old. And again, we don't know. I mean, we did live close to a highway. So whether, exhaust from the cars had something to do with it, we were on a well. So was there something in the water? Honestly, there's nothing that they can pinpoint. I mean, they've done a lot of blood work too, to try to isolate the factor. Now, the other interesting thing is I remember asking the pediatrician saying, well, if we had another baby, would there be a chance that they could come out autistic? And she said, even though it's not genetic, chances are there's a very good chance you could have another one. It's not a guarantee, but there's a very good chance. And so I made the decision at that time that we would only have one because I knew that he was going to be high needs his whole life and that I could only devote all of my time and energy to doing that. So that's what we ended up doing.
Does government help?
So the government, they do. It's a fight. And you'll see on the news every once in a while, we have to get back up and fight for our rights. Unfortunately, it's very expensive. Everything to do with autism is very expensive, from sensory blankets that you could buy at Walmart yourself for about $40. If you buy it on an autism website, is probably going to be $130. Unfortunately, everything to do with autism just costs a lot, including schooling. So his ABA school that he goes to is a privately run school, but fortunately the government does help us pay for that. If we had to pay for it ourselves, he goes 3 days a week for 8 hours each day for a year. And it would cost us, if we had to pay out of pocket, over $70,000. Before the government came in with any type of funding help, I know parents were mortgaging their homes. They were giving up their life savings just to try to get the treatment for their child. I mean, you'll do anything for your child and try to find the money anywhere, but it really puts you in a financial hardship sometimes when you're facing those kind of costs, especially when private school is about half the cost for a child that doesn't have autism.
You said he may need assistance forever. What kind of arrangements does government have, if any, for adults with autism?
So unfortunately, the adult services are very few and far between. I know it's something that the government is trying to work on providing, because there are so many children right now with autism. They know that there's going to be this growing adult population coming up soon who's going to need care. As it stands right now, any of the centers that they do have for adults with autism, there is about a 12 to 16 year wait to get on those.
Sorry, 16-year wait? So
yeah.
Is your name on the waiting list now?
No. So I cannot put my name on the waiting list until he turns 16, and then the wait begins. So this
when
is
he's
where
36, you might be able to get.
Yeah. So that is obviously not an option for most parents, because you can't wait that long. The other option is private residencies. And the last one that I just looked into, they quoted me, it's about $90,000 a year to have care, full-time care. So again, it's the challenges of, not only having a child with autism, but knowing that you're going to need care for them when they're older. And what does that look like? And financially, what does that look like? Which is, why we work so hard now to try to provide for him in the future.
Now, I apologize for this, but just let me ask you some practical questions. You say he's now toilet trained.
Yes.
And you said he does have these violent bursts at times, but you've got those under control.
Yes.
What is a day like? Can he dress himself?
So he technically can. He's a very silly child. Now, I will say for my son, I get to see his personality shine through a lot. I know you've seen me on Facebook, Brian, and through some of my videos, I have a sense of humor, and my son did definitely get my sense of humor. And so he is very silly and does a lot of silly things. He can dress himself, but he will do things like put a shirt on his head, and that's it. To him, that's getting dressed, or putting his socks halfway on his feet, or pulling his pants up just to his knees and then shuffling around very awkwardly down the stairs, because to him, that's getting dressed. He has clothes on. They're not in the right places they should be, but to him, that's getting dressed. So it's always, I always say sometimes it's like having a 2-year-old most days, in those senses, because he can't put his shoes on himself. He can get his coat on finally and zip it up, which is great. But yeah, I'm always clothes correcting him, because you can't let him walk out the way he goes.
Can he eat on his own? Can you take him out to McDonald's?
He can. That was actually a big challenge, to get him to eat on his own. He still has challenges eating with utensils. He still cannot write his name. He cannot, he's finally learning how to pick up a pen, and he's got an interest in drawing and art, which is really nice to see. Especially, my side of the family was very artistic growing up. So it's really nice to see him taking an interest in that. And it's also helping with his dexterity. Going to restaurants is very recent, to be honest. It used to be very difficult, because we would sit him down and he would need food immediately. And as soon as he was done, he would slide out under the table and need to run around. And no matter how many times you put him back, he'd grab plates off tables, he'd pull hair, he'd pull tablecloths. It was an overwhelming environment for him. And so it was really difficult. We gave up on taking him anywhere for the most part. When we had him, we were almost like hermits, because trips to the zoo, anything like that, usually didn't go well. It's literally only been probably in the last 2 years that we've been able to take him places. 2 years ago, we were able to take him to Wonderland for the first time, which we were very nervous. And fortunately, there is a program called Access for parents. So if any parents who have autistic children, you can look up, it's called Access Ontario. And it's a card that they give you, and there's many vendors that support it. And it will actually give you the child, you pay for the child, but you as the caregiver get in for free, because they know most times, or a lot of the time, you may not last very long at that attraction. And so, you know, rather than spending full price ticket only to leave 2 minutes later, it gives you a sense of that you can try it and not fear that you're going to lose your life savings on all of these things if you have to leave. So, which is really nice.
And you say he goes to public school as well as the ABA school.
He does.
He's in a special class at the public school?
He is. That's actually very new this year. I had to fight from the day he got into kindergarten to really advocate for him to get into a special class. I mean, we did try it for several years with him, you know, just in a regular class with an EA, which worked okay at the beginning in JK and kindergarten because it's very play-based. As soon as he hit grade 1, we knew it wasn't going to work because sitting still is impossible for him. He really can do it for 10 minutes tops, and then he needs to move. And it's not, a lot of people mistake it up. Oh, well, you know, you just need to teach him to sit down, but he physically needs to move. It's the way his brain is wired. It's almost that he gets too much pent up energy. And if you make him sit for too long, he will actually smash his head off of the table in frustration, which is one of the most horrible things I can ever say a parent sees when their child is physically trying to injure themselves. It's the most horrible thing I've ever seen. And so I knew, and it was happening a lot at public school. And so together with the principal at his school, we took it right up to, you know, the Board of Education and said, you know, this is a case that needs to be in a special class. And finally, he's now in grade 4. He's finally gotten into that class, and it's been a tremendous difference for him.
Is he with people really his own age or what?
So it's once you're in the class, you're in it for the whole school, or sorry, your whole school career. So he will be in it till grade 12. So he is in with students mostly from grade 4 to grade 8. It's a mix. I think there's about 12 kids in the class. It's a very small class. And then when he goes to high school, he'll be put in the special education class again with grade 9 to 12.
And you say he's got, you know, I think you said he's 10 years old, but it's like a 3-year-old. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. He'll be 10 in March.
What's he able to learn in school?
So they try to, basically I explain it that he's basically back in preschool. So they are teaching him things like safety. You know, stop means you don't go forward. And they're playing those type of games to teach him safety. They're teaching him things like how to try to tie your shoes, or how to put your shoes on, or practical life skills, basically. You know, dexterity things. They're teaching him puzzles. They're teaching him simple things like his alphabet. He can actually now say his alphabet and count to 20, which was amazing for us to see. You know, it's definitely not the things that other kids are learning. He does participate in, you know, gym class and those type of activities, but definitely not the math and the sciences and all of the things that, you know, children his own age would be typically learning right now.
Does he have friends on the street?
He doesn't. That's one of the most difficult things for autistic children is socialization. The word autism itself actually means aloneness or oneness. And so they're very much trapped almost in their own minds sometimes. He relates much better to adults than he does to children his own age. And it's simply because he doesn't know how to interact. We actually, right before COVID had started in his autism school, he was starting to learn a socialization program. He was only in it, I think, a week and a half, and COVID hit. And so now, because of social distancing, they actually can't physically do that program where he would be teamed up with a couple of children with autism and, you know, taught those socialization skills. So hopefully in the near future, you know, once all of this craziness is over, we'll be able to reestablish that program, because I think it will really help him.
My gosh, we're having quite the conversation with Vanessa Shelley this evening about her challenges being a mom with a child with autism. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, we're chatting about autism with Vanessa Shelley. She's a real estate agent in the Durham region, and we're talking about her challenges of raising a child with autism. You know, Vanessa, you were telling me that your marriage recently broke down over one of the issues obviously being the challenges raising an autism child. Tell me a little bit about that, if you don't mind. It must have been unbelievably difficult. You say the two of you went into a restaurant and he was under the table and grabbing hair and stuff like that. How did you try to deal with it?
I mean, in the early years, we would try to support each other for it. I mean, we would go in phases. It was almost like tag team. One of us would be like, I can't take it anymore. And the other one would attempt to try to, it's okay, or I'll be strong. And then they would fall. And then it was always, one of us was always trying to pick the other one up through it. It came to the point where we both just got mentally exhausted, I think. And I think COVID really sort of sealed our fate on that one. As far as that one, it just, it becomes overwhelming. At the point when everything sort of happened, he was actually trashing the whole house, my son. So we would try to go out for a date night, and we would have a sitter, and he would literally take pictures off the walls, smash the microwave, clear the countertops, he's very strong. He would flip the TV off the wall, all kinds of things. And so we would literally be out for 20 minutes and be getting a phone call from a very scared babysitter, who was trained, I might add, too, in autism, that she didn't feel safe and that we needed to come home. And so, even the little breaks that we would try to establish for ourselves to, get some time to, clear our heads and to recharge, most of the time ended up being a disaster, unfortunately. And it came to the point where we didn't even want to go out anymore, because we knew that it was going to be disappointing for us, unfortunately. And so it became very difficult for us. And, I have to say, as difficult as everything has been throughout the breakdown, one thing that we have agreed on is that, as difficult as everything is, having these little breaks and being able to sort of put some time and energy back into rebuilding ourselves up while the other one has made us better parents and better people.
How do you take care of yourself?
Self-care was one of those things that I didn't think was important for a very long time, especially when we first started this journey of autism. I just thought that every moment of every day had to be devoted to finding a cure. Finding a cure was honestly my goal for 2 years when he was first diagnosed. And when I realized that probably wasn't something that was in the near future, I learned that I had to take care of myself, and my ex-husband had to take care of himself in order for us to be okay for our son. And so we would take turns, having just a break to ourselves, whether it was half an hour, taking a drive down to the lake just to clear our heads, or, going for a golf game or going for a massage or something while the other one watched him, just so that we could have that time to rebuild.
So when you talk about self-care is time alone?
It's time alone. It's remembering that even though this is a situation that's very much out of your control, the one thing that you can control is the time that you put into yourself. And that could be reading a book, a motivational book, or listening to a book on tape, or, having an extra long shower. I know I've talked to so many autism moms that say, I lock myself in the bathroom and have a 20-minute shower because it's the only time that I feel at peace. And, you will burn out very quickly in the life of autism as a mom and dad, especially.
Okay, so let's call a spade a spade. A lot of people looking at you would say, you're not burnt out. You're dealing with this unbelievably well. What's your secret?
I am now. The answer to that is I am now. Now things are better for me, even though they're harder being a single mom, if that makes sense, because I get those breaks. And I'm definitely not saying that the answer to it is to split up and take your breaks, but I'm saying that you need to take those breaks, whether it's having your partner go out or, have a babysitter or have a friend or have a parent or have someone to give you a small break every once in a while, because you need to be able to recharge yourself. And now that I'm able to do that, I'm able to be a warrior for my son and fight harder and have the time and energy to be the fun mom that he wants. My son loves to dance and he loves to sing and be silly and do all of these things. And before, I really didn't have the time or energy or strength, to be perfectly honest, in me to do that. And now I'm able to do those things and I'm a better mom for it.
Vanessa, Shelley, a real estate agent in the Durham region who has a child with autism, is a single mom, and has the added challenge that all of us have been dealing with. But I think for her, it's probably even more extreme of dealing with all of this during COVID-19. What an incredible story. Thank you for being this incredible mom to your son and showing us how all of us can deal with life's challenges, because you've certainly been challenged. Thank you so much for telling us your story.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's our show for tonight. I come to you every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock, 960 a.m., or you can stream me online at saga960am.ca, or all my podcasts and video casts are available online at briancrombie.com. My gosh, what a story. Thanks, Vanessa. Really appreciate it. Good night, everybody.